Hello, my name is Dennis, and welcome to my trailer park white trash mobile home kitchen. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. For this video, I thought I would do my white bread recipe. It has been one of the most popular downloads on my website. I was a bit surprised by that because white bread recipes are so common. Maybe it's because of the economy. People are trying to save money. Making your own bread is a good way to save money. I save a lot of money because I buy my flour at the warehouse store and I buy it in the 25-pound bag. And then because I use 2 pounds of flour for each recipe whenever I make my bread, I will portion this entire bag down into 2-pound portions in Ziploc bags and store it in a box. When I make bread this way, it's pretty much about 25 cents per loaf for a single 1-pound loaf. So that's a lot of savings of money. So let's talk about the ingredients that I use when making my white bread. Baking requires accuracy when using flour, so rather than simply using a measuring cup, I like to weigh my flour because there's a difference between what's called scooping, that is scooping flour in a measuring cup, and sifting flour into a measuring cup. I want to show you the difference here in the amount of weight those two methods end up with. So I have my digital scale set up. I have my 1-cup container. So I'm going to set that on there and turn on my scale so it can zero out. That's called the tare weight. And then I'm going to just scoop my flour out of my flour sack, level it off, and weigh this. That should be about, oh, that's 5.9 ounces. That's typically what I see, between 5.5 and 5.9 ounces. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is put my cup on a paper plate to catch the overflow, and I'm going to scoop the flour into my sifter, and I'm going to sift this until it overflows. Okay, that's overflowing all the way around. I'm going to scrape this off and then measure it. 4 ounces, 4.1 ounces. So the other cup scooped was nearly 6 ounces. This is nearly 4 ounces. There's a lot of variation there. When it says sifted flour in a recipe, that's how you sift flour. Otherwise, you would scoop flour. With nearly 2 ounces difference in these 2 cups, what I always do is I weigh my flour. I know that for my recipe with 2.5 cups of liquid, I know I'm going to need exactly 2 pounds of flour. So I always weigh my flour and then put it in those Ziploc bags in 2-pound measurements. So then I know exactly how much flour I'm going to work with. There's no variation. My bread comes out right every single time. Whenever I make bread, I always make 2 loaves. So I have 2 pounds of flour. As I mentioned, I portion them off into 2-pound portions and seal them in Ziploc bags. Then I use a tablespoon of yeast, 1 tablespoon of flour. This is 2 tablespoons of vital wheat gluten. I don't know that it's absolutely necessary. In the PDF, I've written that it's optional. The vital wheat gluten puts more gluten in the dough, and that gives it more elasticity, which helps you to get a little more of a rise. I use it just simply because I've got it. Then I have 2 teaspoons of salt. I use beer in my bread making. I think it gives it a little bit better flavor. You don't have to use it if you don't want. You need 2.5 cups of liquid, so I have 1 cup of water, and then I know that a bottle of beer is 1.5 cups of liquid. And then I use butter in my recipe. Maybe I use about 1/4 cup to 1/3 cup of butter. I work this into the dough after the dough is made. You'll see me do that. So those are the ingredients for this recipe. I start off by mixing up half of my flour, roughly half, so I measure about 3 of these scooped cups of flour into my mixing bowl. And then I put in my sugar, my vital wheat gluten, and my yeast. And then I use a whisk to just get these all roughly mixed up. You don't have to be real fussy about that. I don't add the salt yet, I add the salt later. Yeast likes to be warm, so I'm going to be heating up my liquid to the ideal temperature of 115 degrees Fahrenheit. It only takes a few minutes because I only have 2.5 cups of liquid in the pan. And I put a digital thermometer in there and stir while I'm heating. Okay, so we're up to 115 degrees here. I'm going to turn this heat off. Our liquid is ready to go. Next we can start putting this into our flour mixture. So I'm just going to pour my warm liquid now into my flour. Again, the yeast likes warmth, so this gets the yeast activated. And I just want to mix this up. And then I'll leave this for 5 minutes to just get the yeast activated. This gets it all excited and ready to go. So this has been sitting for 5 minutes. This is getting the yeast activated. I'm going to work this flour in a little at a time. And eventually this is just going to become too dry and too stiff to work with a spatula. And that's when I'll get my hands in there. I want the finished dough to be a little bit sticky. It should be a little bit moist, a little bit tacky, without being so sticky that I can't get it off my fingers. And this is the point at which I can start working in my salt. I don't put the salt in earlier because the yeast might not like all that salt in the early stage. Now it's got so much flour in there that that salt is pretty well diluted as I mix this in. All right, so I'm ready to start kneading this. This is pretty stiff right now. It's already coming out of the bowl. And then just going to start kneading this all together. You can see I pretty much got all that flour incorporated. Okay. Can even use this to pick up the bits of flour. And now what I do is this just gets kneaded for about five minutes until it's smooth. Kneading does a couple of things. It gets everything mixed together so you have a nice, smooth, homogeneous consistency. But it also starts to hook up the protein chains, the glutens, that'll give the dough its elasticity. So what I'm doing when I knead is I'm running the heel of my hand in and then kind of folding it over with my other hand. Again, running my heel of my hand in and just working this back and forth to get this all smooth. Okay, I've been kneading this. This is very smooth. It's not sticking to my hand. It's got a nice elastic feel to it. What I want to do right now is work in some butter. Again, about 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup. I'm going to work it in a little at a time. You're going to see the dough break up here, and it's kind of messy, but it will come back together again. You just keep it. So there it is breaking up because of the butter. This is like making brioche. Only with brioche, you use milk rather than water, and you work in a lot of butter in brioche. This looks hopelessly broken up. Some of you might think this will never come back together again, but it does. Just get your fingers into it, keep working. Once you start getting the butter into it, it'll actually incorporate the next butter a lot more easily. Okay, knead that a little bit. As you can see, that's coming right back together again into a dough. It does work in. Okay, so there's our dough again. I'm going to put a lot more butter in this time because I know at this point it'll work in more easily. And that'll probably be enough butter. And there it is, all broken up. All right, I'm going to knead this for a few minutes just to make sure I have that nice and evenly distributed. And then we'll be ready to set this aside to rise. So with the butter in it, as you can see, that came together again really nicely. What I like to do is I like to use the bowl from my stand mixer to rise my bread. It's just the right size. I know when it reaches the top, it's going to be fully ready. Sometimes I'll use my stand mixer to knead and make the bread, but I did it by hand for you today. I buttered the bowl so it won't stick. Put the dough in there, roll it around a little bit to coat the surface with butter. And then I just pat it into the bottom of the bowl and then put some plastic wrap on there. And that is ready to let rise. You want to let it rise until it's doubled in bulk. It's going to be 45 minutes to an hour depending upon how warm your kitchen is. My favorite place to put it is on top of the refrigerator. So you may remember when I pressed this dough down into the bottom of this bowl, it filled the bottom of the bowl, and look how that has risen and completely filled that bowl and is actually up over the top now. That's where I like to see it. Our next step is to punch this down and then roll it into loaves to go into loaf pans. So you just get in there with your hands and break that dough down to take all the air out. And we're basically reducing it back down to where it was before. I'm going to knead that a little bit. And then I want to cut this in half, roughly in half. And I'm going to shape loaves out of this. Okay, so at these two halves now, I just kind of spread these out into like a rectangle, like so. And then just kind of roll these up. And then pinch the ends together there. Like so, and then turn that down with the seam on the bottom. And that's what goes into our loaf pans. Same thing with this other piece of dough. Press it down into a rectangle. And then just roll this up. Pinch the ends together, turn it seam side down, and place that in a loaf pan. Okay, so when these, what you do is you let these rise again for about an hour. They'll rise up over the top of the pan, and you'll have what looks like regular loaves of bread. I do this when I'm making bread for toast in the morning or bread for sandwiches. These are typical 1 pound loaves. But I want to show you a special loaf, special way you can make some bread. So let me put these aside and bring out my fancy bread. So this is a 5 braid loaf. I use the entire amount of bread dough rather than folding it into 2 loaves like that. I cut it into 5 equal parts and then made long strands with them, and then I braided them to form this loaf of bread. And then to get this nice dark color on the outside, I made an egg yolk wash. I just used the yolk of the egg, mixed it with a little bit of water, maybe a teaspoon of water. You do that a couple of hours in advance, put a little bit of salt in it to let the egg yolk break down so that it becomes very much of a liquid. And then using a pastry brush, you paint the outside of the dough right before you put it into the oven, and when it bakes up, it gets dark and gives you that beautiful loaf of bread. So that's another idea of what you can do with bread. I just wanted you to see what the finished loaf looks like. This is one of those loaves that I've baked. I already have it sliced. I use a rotary slicer to slice my bread. So again, this is a very easy recipe to make. You can either make this in a loaf pan as I did, or you can make that fancy bread, the braided loaf. Bread is very versatile. You can do what you want with it.